Please Don't Touch Anything is actually quite a hard game to go too in depth about in a review, because talking about the puzzles too much would certainly give away spoilers.
Well, that's one way of getting out of doing a lot of work for a review.
Oh, why don't you just pipe down for once? I know, instead of concentrating on my reviewing skills, why don't you focus on not pressing this button?
I gracefully accept your challenge.
The game is set in a small room with a strange console in front of you. It begins with a man briefly telling you not to touch anything, whilst he quickly goes for a toilet break, and then you're free to, well, touch things. You can move around the room by either teleporting, or you can actually walk around it in the real world. If you want to use room scale, you're going to need a very large play area. Mine wasn't quite big enough, so I had to use teleportation. If you play seated, you will need to use a swivel chair, as there is no free or snap turning in the game. You can adjust your height at any time by pushing an analog stick up or down, so reaching things is possible while seated. The main aim of the game is to see every one of the 30 unique endings. You do this by interacting with things and solving puzzles. Interaction can be fiddly, as sometimes a switch won't react to your hand collision, or a book won't be grabbed at the angle you want it to be at, and the pages of it open up no matter what. The physics engine also has a mind of its own. Some things simply don't want to be held when picked up for the first time, and some things don't collide very well, but the majority of the interaction here works well, as a lot of the time you're simply pushing one of the many buttons, but if you're doing something other than that, you often find yourself fighting with the mechanics. Although most of the time you're simply pushing buttons, that doesn't mean the game is easy to get through. It can actually be very tough, even early on in the game. The console begins with only one main button and a reset button. This reset button basically resets the whole level. As you progress, loads more buttons appear on the console. You get more by entering several button combinations. These combinations can simply be found around the room, or sometimes they require you to really think outside the box. Some button panels can be hidden behind some quite devious combinations, so even with the 30 endings here, you could potentially be stuck for a little while after only seeing a handful of endings. It can be frustrating at times, but on the other hand, when you do finally have that eureka moment, and you're rewarded with a whole new set of buttons to mess around with, and potentially a new ending to see just around the corner, it does urge you on and your curiosity, especially as you never know what is actually going to happen in the ending. The endings really are quite random. Some contain horror elements, and some are just completely crazy. Some even show you what's happening outside your room on a screen in front of you, and the room itself changes depending on what is happening. The endings don't last very long at all though, so you're really going to have to be the type of gamer that feels a great sense of reward from simply solving a puzzle. You can see how many endings you have completed and have left to find, thanks to lights on the side of the console. You are also rewarded with either an image or new object in your room after you have seen an ending.
And what will my reward be after I've shown you that I can prevent myself from pushing this button?
Let's just see if you can get through this whole review first. The more endings you see, the harder the game gets, but it's not always because of the difficulty tied to the actual puzzles. That's not to say some don't get tougher, because they certainly do, but the real challenge comes from remembering all of the combinations to access new button panels, and also remembering which ones to enter after the other, as some combinations open up a whole new route of panels that can only be reset by a push of the reset button. I wish I had a pen and paper next to me to take notes. It absolutely feels like a game that the player would benefit from having, but obviously you don't want to be taking the headset on and off constantly. I can certainly see this game appealing more to people with incredible memory skills, as having to search for the same button combination again after a reset or ending is quite a tedious process. Feeling the urge to push that button yet, Mr. Oculus?
Oh please, we are now entering the final stage of the review. I think I can manage.
This is a port of an older VR game, and you really can tell that it is, due to some of the less than fluid interaction. It's a shame that this and the physics engine wasn't updated for its Quest release. This, combined with the sheer amount of things you must remember, actually made it a more of a frustrating experience for me, rather than an enjoyable one. Overall, it actually reminds me of a 90s point-and-click adventure game. The difficulty is certainly reminiscent of them, and to be honest, I think this is the hardest VR puzzle game I've ever played. I can certainly see some gamers absolutely loving the challenge that this game has to offer, and I really do admire how many puzzle elements are hidden inside this seemingly empty small room. But I think a lot of VR players will want a puzzle game that gradually increases in difficulty over time. This game really is only for a certain type of gamer.
Well, would you look at that? I never even thought about pressing the button.
Well done. I'm actually glad you didn't.
And why is that?
It doesn't actually do anything. I even told you at the beginning. I wanted you to focus on something other than me.
I've never felt so cheated in my entire life. You, sir, are an absolute...
And you, Mr Oculus, are a gullible gentleman.
Mr. Oculus.